we tend to get stuck, and events of death can really get us stuck. You know, I don't know if you've heard my little story. I was on the set of The Shack, and there was a couple. Actually, it started with just being invited to come back to the set near the end of their shoot up in British Columbia, and I had this thought. You know, I got a friend named Brad Jerzak, who's a theologian who I've been trying to meet face to face. We've had lots of conversations, but I'd never met him. And the shoot's up in British Columbia, and he and his wife Eden live in British Columbia. And so I'm going like, I wonder if because he spends half his, or a good chunk of his year in London as a seminary professor. Mm. And so I email him and tell him what I'm doing. I'm coming up on Wednesday. They called me out of the blue. So I'm coming up. Are you in town? Thursday, I'm going to be on the set. Friday, they're sending me home. And immediately get an email back saying, can I pick you up at the airport?
Fabulous.
Yes, absolutely. That'd be awesome. And he said, okay, I'll pick you up. We'll have lunch together. We'll spend the afternoon. We'll talk shop and theology, and then we'll have supper with Eden, and then I'll take you to your hotel and you can go about your business. Well, it's all set. 2 minutes later, I get another email going like, look, and it has a photo on it. And he says, this is my friend Dwight. Dwight is a business guy, one of my oldest friends, first person who told me about the Shack, first person who gave me a copy of the Shack. He and his wife, Lori, and Lori is a spiritual formations director. They have a little cabin up at Cultus Lake where we're spending a week. And while we were emailing, Dwight and I were in the woods, and look, and on the side of their picture is a big fluorescent green arrow that says the Shack. One of the site locations was right there. And
wow.
And it was like, oh, wow, how cool is that? Now, I don't know if I'm going to that site location because, you know, they always have multiple site locations. And then he says, you know, if there's any way you could spend 10 minutes with Dwight and Lori, your book had such a huge impact on their life. But 3 years ago, the youngest of their 5 children went into the woods, into a treehouse, and gave her life back to God. She took her life. And they're stuck. They're completely stuck. And he says, Dwight believes that if he could just read the Shack, he could get unstuck, but he hasn't been able to make it past chapter 1. And Lori is just furious in every sense. Furious at God, furious at life. You know, I mean, she's a truth teller, and it's like, she's stuck. And because why? Because her daughter is dead.
Right.
You know, and he said, even if you could spend 10 minutes, I said, we'll figure it out. I'll come up there and we'll figure it out. So I come up, it's like meeting a long lost brother. We connect instantly, spend the day together, have supper with Eden. And then he drops me off at the hotel, and I told him, when I get the call sheet, I'll let you know where I'm going to be. And he and Eden go back up to Cultus Lake to be with Dwight and Lori. 11:30 that night, I get the call sheet. We're going to pick you up at 9:30 and take you to the set location at Cultus Lake.
Oh, fabulous.
Right? Fabulous. So now I'm 2.5 blocks away from where they're staying. And I'm texting Brad like, hey, I'm here. And he's going, we have food ready. Anytime you have a chance, just come down. We'll meet you. We'll come down the waterfront at the lake and we'll meet you and take you in 10 minutes, even if we can get that. I walk on set to the producer and the directors, and the director and the producers, and I say, look, tell them the basic story and say, is there any way that my 4 friends could come on set for the day? And they said, absolutely. And 20 minutes later, down the waterfront comes Brad and Eden and Lori and Dwight. And they got embraced into this arena of creativity. So they come onto the set, and one of the reasons they wanted me there was that they were shooting outdoor shots of the Shack. They had built the Shack at this set. There was a different set for the town. There was a different set for the garden, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So, but this is where the Shack was built. Mm-hmm. And they also had the lake scenes shot here. And so you can't hear anything when they're doing an outdoor shot. But they have what's called a video village. This is where the director and the producer, they sit in this big movable tent with video screens up, and they can watch exactly what's being shot by the cameras and listen with headphones on what's being recorded. Well, I didn't ask them, but they put 5 chairs in front of the screens with 5 sets of headphones so that we could sit there and watch whatever it was that was being shot. And I still didn't know. You know, it could be anything because they don't shoot in sequence.
Right.
You know, it's when the actors are available and stuff. So we sit there, I'm on one end, Brad's on the other end, and we're going to watch one scene being shot over and over and over all morning long, then take a break for lunch, one scene that's being shot all afternoon. And so we're sitting there, and the scene in the movie is where Mackenzie's had his first night at the shack. He's had nightmares about the loss of his daughter, Missy. And he's had a flying dream, and he just catapults into the ground. He's stuck in the mud. He sees the perpetrator. Missy's yelling, "Daddy, Daddy," and that's what he wakes up from, right? So he has got all this emotion racing through his heart and his mind. It's morning. He's confused about where he is and who's there. And he walks out onto the porch. And this is where they start the shot. He's walking out onto the porch, and Papa God's got breakfast waiting for him. And she's singing, "Only love can break your heart," you know. And so, "You like Neil Young?" "He's okay. I'm especially fond of him." And she says, "How'd you sleep?" He goes, "Fine." Right? You can see all the ways that we deal with our losses by isolating ourselves, you know.
Mm-hmm.
"Fine." She goes, "Dreams are important. Sometimes they're a way of letting, open up the window, letting the bad air out, you know." And,
I love that.
And he doesn't say anything. He sits down. He won't touch anything. And they start this conversation. He says, "Is there anybody you're not especially fond of?" She goes, "Nope." "Well, what about your wrath?" And they start getting into the, you know, some of the imagery and some of the language that many of us religious people were taught about the kind of God, you know, so all this fury and rage on the part of God. And Papa God's like, "My what?" You know, and so you've got this conversation that's so intense inside of the emotions, and you think, like, how does this relate? And then we're watching this being shot, right? It's all one shot. And then she goes, "Mackenzie, the fundamental flaw in your life is that you don't believe that I'm good. And until you believe that she says, I am. And I'm at work in everything you consider to be a mess for your good. But until you believe that I'm good, you're never going to be able to trust me." And he says, "Why would I ever trust you? My daughter is dead. And there's nothing you can do to change that." And he gets up, smashes the glass off the table, and walks away. And the director says, "Cut, reset." And we're sitting in Video Village. And I glance over at Lori and Dwight, and they're in shock. Because in this one little scene, we get to see played out exactly what's going on in their life.
Wow.
And so we watch it again. And we watch it again. And the third time, Lori just gets up and walks out of the tent, and I follow her out, and she just weeps in my arms. And then she goes back in the tent to watch it again. Unless you believe that I'm good, you're never going to be able to trust. Why would I ever trust you? My daughter is dead. My daughter is dead. Right? And you've got this thing just played out inside of all of this grief and all of this loss. And we finally break for lunch. You know, they've got all the shots that they want. And we go to lunch, and over comes Octavia Spencer, who plays Papa God, and just loves on him. Wraps him up in her arms. And so does Sumi, the Holy Spirit. And so does Aviva Lush, who played Jesus. And then we break for the afternoon. We go to sit down in Video Village on another scene. And it's the one where Mackenzie's sitting on the porch. And Papa comes out and says, "Supper's ready soon." Oh, and says, "See that bird? Look at this little bluebird that's up in the tree. That bird was created to fly. You know, you were created to live loved, but sometimes pain is a way of clipping your wings, and you forget you were ever created to fly." And at one point he says, why did you bring me here? And she says, because here is where you got stuck. Today, Mackenzie, today's your flying lesson. And we're in Video Village bawling. I mean, it's just like, and that night when they were leaving, they said, you have no idea. And I said, you're right. But I'm thinking like, I had no rights or creative control over the movie. They didn't have to invite me back. They had invited me for the first day in order to pray a blessing over the entire cast and crew. That's what Lionsgate asked me to do. But I didn't know they were going to ever invite me back. And they did. And, I get a nudge to contact Brad because he might be in town. And, and he's not only in town, he's walking up in the woods. And look, they run into a set for the shack, and it's the one that I end up at. And then these are the scenes that we get to watch. And it's just like,
and then his friends.
I know.
That is the Holy Spirit.
So you asked me how the Holy Spirit works. There is an example, right? And as a result, Lori, who is the spiritual formations director, we are about this fall, we're going to do the third, what's called Grand Embrace, because she got unstuck and Dwight got unstuck. And Lori, it's called the Grand Embrace because when she walked on set the very first time, I gave her a hug and I didn't let her go until I felt something. I could feel all this fury and anger and disappointment and loss and grief. And I just held her, and she calls that the Grand Embrace.